Now, okay. We are live.
Great.
It is Sunday, April 5th, 5 o'clock. Boris Johnson is in the hospital. There are 4,000 people on ventilators in New York City alone. We're not allowed to have fun anymore, but in lieu of fun, Kate and I have mystery guests. Kate, will you please introduce your mystery guest?
Yes, I'm thrilled to bring Scott Shapiro. He is a professor of law at Yale Law School, a philosopher, an all-around good guy, and the author of a book that was really helpful to me this last year called Legality, and which he has a really great podcast about. And like, which you should totally listen to. He is a rising star in the Twitterverse, and has been by, I think, our previous guest. Hold on, let's see. Our previous guest, what did Oren Kerr say about you? Oren Kerr said that he was, God, I wish that my internet was working. Apparent. Oh, yes. Here it is. Oren Kerr has described him as bad for Yale and bad for America. So thank you for being with us today, Scott.
Sorry, go ahead, Scott.
Can you guys hear me?
We hear you just fine.
Okay, that's good. I just felt that there were so many people on Twitter that were cool that had insults thrown at them, and then I crowdsourced who could insult me the best, and Oren won. So.
Well, that is excellent. Oren wins many competitions involving wit. So let me introduce my mystery guest. My mystery guest is also a professor, though not of law, professor of international relations at the Fletcher School at Tufts University. He is also, in my opinion, the author of the most amusingly important Twitter feed in the history of Twitter, or Twitter thread in the history of Twitter, which is, I believe, the only Twitter thread in history to become an academic press book, the Toddler-in-Chief thread. Please welcome to In Lieu of Fun, Dan Drezner, who should turn on his camera. Thank you, Dan.
There you go.
There we go. Yeah.
Did you hear any of that?
I did. Happy to see all of you. I apologize. I don't have the funky backgrounds that you do. I tried doing that and it looks really bad. I think my computer must be old or something, but
you know, I actually think you should go with the pretense that that is your funky background and that you have like a cool funky background that has a stuffed animal and a slanted bookcase.
I have both of these things, and also, you know, this is no ordinary stuffed animal. This is Bloom County's Opus, which, you know, I've had for decades and has followed me wherever I go. So, but happy to be here. And yes, I have the distinction of turning the first Twitter thread into a book, I suppose, which is a dubious distinction at best. But, you know, I'm sure Oren Kerr can come up with something nasty to say about that, which would actually be quite witty.
Not just a Twitter thread. It's not just a book.
Right.
It's a book published by the University of Chicago Press. I mean, like, if there were...
It got through peer review.
Right. If there were a Nobel Prize...
I don't know that that's like really like in its favor. Like, I think stick with the success on Twitter.
Well, I like to think of it as multitasking. It's simultaneously success on Twitter, plus the book got through peer review, and there's an article version of it that got published in International Affairs, which is a decent IR journal run by Chatham House, also through peer review. So this thing got peer reviewed twice. You know, if you had told me 5 years ago, you know, Drezner, you're going to have something published in which you basically argue that the president of the United States acts like a 2-year-old, and it'll get through peer review, I don't think I would have believed it.
Yeah, now it doesn't even sound like
Now it's like,
in
yeah,
addition
shrug your
to-
shoulders are like really brave
Right,
move,
like,
Drezner. That's really
duh,
like,
of course
yeah,
it got through peer review.
exactly.
It's
Yes,
true.
yes. But the fact that it happened is still kind of, sort of astonishing.
Okay,
Well,
I just tweeted out the live YouTube link, so retweet and do whatever, and tagged you guys in the tagged you guys as guests, because someone has to keep this thing running while you all are like having fun.
So the rules. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Kate.
No, I'm done. That was it. I was just yelling at you.
The rules of this. The rules of this show are that all the planning for the show is done on the show. That it is a combination.
So it's a normal academic conference, is what you're saying. Okay,
yeah, it's a combination of improv and a cocktail party and Wikipedia, in the sense that if we think something's interesting, we just kind of go off in that direction. And if we need to grab somebody from the audience to have a conversation with, we just do it. So speaking of which, to the live audience on Zoom, if you want to get in on the conversation and you are not a psychotic Zoom bomber, feel free to leave one, and not, when I say one, I really mean not 200 questions in the Q&A box. And if we determine that you are a real person, we will bring you onto the show to ask your question. And if you ask 200 times for pussy, please, and you misspell please every single time.
Where the hell did that come from?
We are not going. Came from yesterday when it happened.
Okay.
200.
It was a dark day. I'm not gonna lie. It was like we dismissed, I think, 750 like repetitive requests for pussy, and like over and over again. Like it was pretty dark.
So anyway, let's get started.
I've never been more frightened in my life. Let's go.
Yeah, the thing is you're not going to see any of these. Just Ben and I will deal with them quietly on our own. It just distracts us from having good conversation. Also, Scott, I have to say that when you first showed up and your head was just like literally your neck sticking up, like, yes, exactly. That was kind of great. But I do appreciate your shoulders.
By the way, the only thing it lacked was a hand kind of holding your hair so that it really looked severed.
By the way, I just want you to know, I will do anything for a laugh. So if you want me to do anything, I will do it. I would just say, but before we start, I was just going to say, I had such an embarrassing interaction with Dan like 3.5 years ago.
Oh, you guys know each other?
No.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
Tell.
Yeah,
this is why we do these things.
Okay.
This is amazing.
Like, the hope is that someday in Mystery Guest we'll get a couple who like used to be married or something.
So what happened was when I first joined Twitter, like in the middle of 2016. Of course, I followed Dan because he's got such an amazing feed, and I don't think I really quite understood what Twitter was, because I had this weird sense that he was kind of talking to me, or he knew that of my existence, even though I had 3 followers. And so I saw him. I was at a conference at Princeton. And so, and he was to a bit of a different conference, and I saw him come out of the elevator, and I ran up to him and I said, "Dan, it's Scott Shapiro," and he just looked at me like I was just like a lunatic, of which I was, and I couldn't believe that he didn't know me, one of his 800 million followers, and he was very gracious about it. But it was a kind of an introduction to this bizarre online world where we're talking to people where we're not talking to people.
I feel like this is such a great moment of like norms developing around the internet and translating into, and then when I say that, I mean social norms. Scott, as you taught me, that like social norms developing around the internet and then translating into real life. So when I was at AALS this year, there are a lot of people that came up and like introduced themselves to me. And I've never met this person for 3 or 4 years. I've been having conversations with them over the internet. And like, you just kind of roll with it and you're like, oh yeah, I know you from Twitter. That's like literally like, you just say it. You're like, oh yeah, Twitter. Oh yeah, Pope hat. Oh yeah. Like, you're like, oh yeah, Southpaw. Like, I got it. Like, I mean, it's just kind of one of these things.
So
Right,
Dan,
right.
do you have any recollection of this interaction?
I have zero memory of this.
No,
But I'm extremely grateful that Scott told this story and it doesn't end with me sounding like a total douchebag.
I know you were very gracious as you always are on Twitter, as far as I can tell.
Oh, that's definitely not true, but thank you. I appreciate that.
Well,
I got blocked this morning actually by someone, so it happens. But
yeah, well, it's me reading too much Adrian Vermeule, maybe.
Oh yeah, you've been talking about that all day, Scott. Who is this guy?
Who's Adrian? Oh wait, I don't know. What are the rules here? What are
the rules are, remember that
the rules are I'm drinking right now.
You are live on YouTube, and beyond that there are no rules. I mean, you do what you're accountable for whatever you say.
But,
but there are no
sorry, go ahead, Ben.
There are no, like, this is a live interaction, and don't do anything you wouldn't do on a stage, and assume that everybody will be able to see what you're ultimately what you say.
And remember, this will live forever.
Yeah, that is also true. That's a key
right point. Okay, so
but that being said, please keep in mind that I'm asking this question. Remember when you tweeted, Scott, of things that you always look up, and then I gave you like a 40-item list of terms that were of things that you always have to look up because you can't remember what they mean. And it was like hermeneutics and federalism and all of these various things. Adrian Vermeule is on that list for me. Also, I remember I've looked him up at some point, and I can never remember who he is exactly.
Okay, right. So for me, by the way, it's polynomial.
I know.
I can't. For the life of me, I can't remember what a polynomial is.
You understand that the answer to polynomial is in the word. It means many number. It means
right. Okay. So yeah, I guess I wanted something a little bit more specific, but anyway, so Adrian is a law professor at Harvard Law School, and he does constitutional theory, and he's a really smart, interesting, prolific constitutional theorist, administrative law scholar, but he is also
super Catholic.
Yes, he's kind of like a modern day Carl Schmitt, in being a Catholic, being on the right, with his views about the role of the executive. He is not a Nazi. Carl Schmitt, of course, was a Nazi for 3 years. I mean, it's like saying he was just a Nazi for 3 years. But I mean, he was actually.
Who among us, though, if you think about it? I mean,
right,
really.
That's one of those.
It's really
things
a sliding scale, Scott.
those are the things that live forever too. That you join the Nazi Party. I mean, he never left the Nazi Party, but he was an outspoken Nazi from 1933 and 1936. But anyway, so Adrian has on his Twitter feed, and I've never followed him because I feel like he purposely tries to troll liberals. And
you feel that way? I think it's just an objective fact that Adrian, and it's not just liberals. I mean, he actively trolls people like me in a very aggressive way.
I have a question. Sorry.
Yeah.
And this is a legit question. Adrian has been on and off Twitter. Is he back on again? Because there was a period where he went off, or then changed his name, or what? Is he currently back on Twitter?
No, I think he deleted his account after the camps. After he made a joke about sending conservatives to the camps.
Ah, okay.
Which upset a lot of people for for good
Can't
reason.
imagine why, yeah.
Right. But by the way, when I say liberal, I mean his sense of liberal, of which you count, meaning somebody who really has this view that the kind of believes in the rule of law and has a view about the neutrality of legal institutions and you know, kind of
small L liberal.
Yeah, exactly, small L liberal. And he wrote an article in the Atlantic called Common Good Constitutionalism, in which he argued that originalism has played its role on the right of ensuring that basically got a 5-4 majority, but now that the conservatives have a majority, it's time to, you know, take off the mask and to try to I'm trying to put it in the fairest way possible. Well,
create a good society, Scott. I don't understand why you're so opposed to this.
Right. So the idea should be to pursue the common good. And when he started listing out what the common good was, it sounded, if you knew his other work, it sounded kind of like what has happened in Hungary with Orban. Now, of course, he didn't say that, but based on the other things that he's written, you know, if you knew the context, you would realize that it would be a Supreme Court that really took authority very seriously. There would be the trade-offs between liberty and authority would be more weighted in terms of authority. There would be respect for tradition. And so a lot of the kind of things that he has been arguing for that would be something that liberals would find very upsetting. And of course, the social media went crazy. And he then, just to make a long story short, he then wrote a blog piece for Mirror of Justice, which is this Catholic blog piece where he said it was all just a joke. What he said was that they published the wrong version of his piece.
That's a huge deal.
Yeah, but then he wrote at the bottom saying it's a satire. So yeah, so I what I had said on Twitter was that he's kind of inaugurated what I call post-irony jurisprudence, where you're never quite sure, is he joking, is he serious, how serious is he?
I hate to say this because I would not normally lump Adrian in with this category, but it almost sounds like an alt-right trope where essentially you say the thing that you potentially mean, but then you back off by saying, oh, but actually I'm saying it from an ironic distance, so therefore I don't really mean it.
Yeah, I like, this is the thing, is it's very hard. So this is what I said in that tweet and various tweets, which is that I kind of tire of it. I tire of trying to guess, what does he think, what doesn't he think? And it feels almost like Trump. That is, like when you try to figure out what game he's playing, it's kind of, you say like, well, maybe I should think about something else. Maybe we shouldn't talk about him all the time. Again, I'm not equating him with Trump. He's not Donald Trump by any means. But it's tiresome in the way in which I find lots of the discourse tiresome.
So I've had my various interactions with Adrian over the years, and I do think that, first of all, I'm surprised to hear he's dismissing it as satire, because I've always found him, whatever else he may be, completely earnest. And I mean, I once had an interaction with him in which I made the mistake of calling him a conservative, and he looked at me very seriously and said, I'm not a conservative, I'm an authoritarian, which took me a little bit aback, because I just don't know that many people who use the word authoritarian to refer to themselves. But I've always, look, he's extremely bright, and he's not he's somebody who's done, genuinely interesting work in administrative law, and he's kind of developed this set of this body of work with Eric Posner that's quite substantial. That's and actually, I think one of the really interesting things right now is how Trump has taken them on very different paths. That Eric Posner, like I suppose people like me, have been, forced back into the fact that we are ultimately small L liberals, and people like Adrian and I, Eric Posner and I have many, many things that we differ about, but one of them that we don't is that 5 years ago, we both would have been called, in some sense, at least by lefties, we would have been called conservatives. Now, I never thought of myself as a conservative, but I was thought of as one by others. And so this environment has forced people like Eric Posner and Adrian Vermeule to go a tectonic level deeper. And when Eric goes a tectonic level deeper, his essential moral universe is not very different from all of ours. And when Adrian goes a tectonic level deeper, his moral universe is wildly different from all of ours. And he actually means authority and I mean, I'm trying to say this without being judgmental or nasty about it, but he actually means the stuff about authority, about legislating morality, which is a big component of that article, and and his fundamental beliefs are anti-liberal in a way that I think he's quite proud of. And so the part of this episode that surprises me, and that was actually, I didn't know until you just said it, is that he's now dismissed the whole thing as satire.
No. Just to be clear, he said the satire was that they published the wrong version.
I see, but I mean, I'm like a little bit disappointed to hear that he's running away from it in any way, because I've always thought of him as a pretty earnest authoritarian.
No, I don't think he's running away from it. I think he was basically, what he was trying to say was, I published the version that they published would have been the version that liberals would have signed on to. You have to read the blog piece in order to see the kind of mind games he's trying to play with the reader. But that's kind of what I'm saying is, I'm almost upset that we're sitting here talking about it.
I would say I object to drinking alcohol and having to talk about Adrian.
Yeah, we can change the topic. We can talk about something. We can talk about something funnier.
I will close with this, which is the reason I object to this is that in no small part, I've known Adrian personally for more than a decade, for close to 15 years. And it's one of the odder aspects of this for me in terms of dealing with him, because the truth be told, both he and I were back at 20 years ago, we're at the University of Chicago together. I was a junior faculty, he was at the law school, and I was part of a Carl Schmitt reading group with him once back in the day. Yeah, exactly. So
that's funny.
Yeah, and let's just say we had very different takes on Carl Schmitt. I actually teach Carl Schmitt. I teach a course called Classics of International Relations Theory, which is a great books course, make people read the whole book and so on and so forth. Mostly, it starts with Thucydides, goes forward. I actually make everyone read Carl Schmitt. For that, in some ways, that was inspired originally by that. But needless to say, I don't take Schmitt nearly as seriously as Adrian does. But the truth is that actually our families, when we both moved to the Boston area, got along quite well, and actually socialized a great deal. We would have them over for dinner, and he would have us over. They would have us over for dinner. His wife is an absolute delight. And about 10 years ago, not on our side, but on theirs, suddenly we just didn't hear from them anymore. They kind of went dark. And, we thought it was maybe something we did or something. My family can be, occasionally annoying. But we weren't the only ones that this happened to. And so you know, but it means that I never feel right talking about Adrian, his political arguments in no small part because, you know, of the personal history and because I honestly don't find it that interesting.
Yeah.
All right, so let's change the subject. Dan Drezner, the floor is yours. What is our next topic?
Oh, Christ, I wasn't expecting that.
Wait, I want to pick. Apparently, there was just an earthquake in California, and also, I think Boris Johnson's in the hospital, and that seems like a good.
Okay,
Yeah, so
wait. I actually have a good question because this is something I'm going to write about for tomorrow. So actually, I'm previewing what my column in the Post is going to be about. So you know, Ben, Scott, I'm assuming both of you are Jewish.
Yeah.
Yeah,
wait,
Kate,
but before you
go ahead.
before you say this, if anybody in the audience is in California and just felt that earthquake, flag it on the Q&A and tell us where you are and what you felt, and we can bring you into the conversation on the earthquake. If anybody in the audience is working in the hospital where Boris Johnson was just admitted, flag that for us, tell us about his condition, and we'll bring you into the conversation.
But
Okay, that last part, yeah.
I was not raised Jewish. I have my ethnic background,
Okay.
like my genetic background is Ashkenazi Jew, but that is not.
Fair enough. So I want a quick thing about the earthquake, and then I'll go to the question I have. The earthquake thing is, I still remember, I want to say it was about 6 or 7 years ago, there was an earthquake that hit the Northeast. And I remember this because it was one of these bizarre things where it was a ripple quake that I think started in New York and then radiated up to Boston, because it was one of those rare things where I saw it on Twitter first and then I felt it when in my office.
Oh, weird.
Yes, exactly. So it was there was one of those strange moments where I was like everyone on on media Twitter that was based in New York was like, wait, was that an earthquake? Was that an earthquake? I was like, oh, something must have happened. And then suddenly about 20 seconds later, I remember being in Medford and like, yeah, that was definitely an earthquake because I went to grad school in California. I know an earthquake when I feel it. So that's always one of the interesting things, is that occasionally Twitter moves more quickly than earthquakes. Something to consider. The question I have is for the Jews, which is this is a post I'm going to write about, I think, for tomorrow. And actually, it came up in a conversation, Ben, with your wife, during a virtual cocktail hour that the two of us had, which is this really the year we should actually obey the laws of Passover? Because we're now operating in a world, the point of the Passover Seder and the point of the holiday is to remember, living in bondage in Egypt, and the fact of what was done to ensure the release of the Jews, namely the 10 plagues. Included in those plagues, by the way, are pestilence, which is plague, and locusts, which are apparently really popular right now in certain parts of sub-Saharan Africa. And part of the reason that Passover is occasionally aggravating for Jews is, of course, that we can't eat leavened bread. We can't eat things with flour in them or yeast. And the reason for that, of course, is that the story goes that after the 10 plagues were inflicted upon Egypt, the Pharaoh let the Jews start their exodus. Moses, not being a dumb bunny, recognized that the Pharaoh might change his mind, and so therefore told the Jews to get out as soon as possible, which meant that they couldn't bake their bread. They couldn't let their bread rise. And so as a result, they had to leave very quickly. There was poor strategic planning on their part. There's no other way to put it, and that's what I'm going to say in the post. My question is that, since we are currently dealing with at least one of these plagues, if not more than one of them, and that, presumably those people, who actually saw, back in late February or early March what was happening and actually stocked up on non-perishable goods, including things like pasta and otherwise, stuff that would be considered chametz in the Jewish tradition. Do we have to get rid of those things? Do we have to abstain?
You went a different way than I thought you were going to. I thought you were going to say that someone should have sent Moses sourdough starter over there. I actually had this moment of does unleavened include yeast and sourdough starter? I actually don't know that. Can you eat sourdough bread, guys?
You cannot. You cannot eat anything with flour. You cannot eat, at least for Ashkenazic Jews.
Yes.
You cannot eat anything with any grain except wheat, and you can only eat wheat in the specific form of matzah, which is
Gross.
which is a
Yes.
which has a very particular
Cardboard
particularly
taste to it.
strict form of unleavened non-leavening.
Well, there are very few things that I know about. I was an Orthodox Jew for a long time, so I know, and I went to yeshiva. I know all the rules.
I will
Which
defer to
yeshiva
you
did
then.
you go
Okay,
to?
very good. Because I was raised conservative, but not Orthodox. So go ahead.
Okay, I went to Frisch, the same yeshiva, the same as Jared Kushner. I'm very proud of that. And I was a yeshiva in Israel for a year during college. I was very devout and at the time learned. Basically, what happens is with your bread, your chametz, your leavened stuff, what most people do, either they throw it out, but in this case you wouldn't do it. What you do is you sell it to a non-Jew.
Right.
Right. So you would just sell it to a non-Jew.
Of course you monetize it. Of course you do.
You don't want to waste it.
You're selling it below market price, okay?
Yeah, right.
Come on.
Right. You sell it for a peppercorn or something. You know, you sell it for a
roll of toilet paper.
Right. Well, not that much, but yeah. So
toilet paper is gold, Jerry. Gold.
No, but there is this. I mean, you raise a really obviously important point about there's this sense when you do the 10 plagues during the Seder that you're kind of getting into it. Like it's kind of cool that God smote the Egyptians because they were mean to them. I mean, they weren't just mean to the Jews if
they did enslave them,
Right, he did enslave them for centuries.
But the sanctions imposed by God would not be considered consistent with the laws of war.
Right. No, not at all. Killing the firstborn definitely wouldn't work.
Also the biological warfare, but keep going.
Right. Yes. But there's a sense of like, when you're going through the plagues, I'm not sure if we'll have a Seder this year because I'm not religious anymore. But if we do, I mean, there's not going to be, I assume most of us are not going to do it with the sense of, relish. I mean, when we did do it, there are these little toys, like little frogs that you throw around and stuff like that. And it doesn't.
The marshmallows, yeah.
Yeah, it does not, right, for the hail, it just does not feel.
What is the thing when you eat the horseradish? That's my favorite part.
That is too. that is the.
I really am a savory person, and like everyone's like chew on some bitter root, and I'm like, I will eat that whole thing.
Herbs, yes. The whole point of so Scott can correct me, but is the maror that you eat.
The maror. That's the name.
It's called the maror, and the reason you eat it is to remember the bitterness of slavery.
Yeah.
Yes. But also, it's very interesting is that what you're supposed to do is you're supposed to invite people over to your house.
Oh, that's true. God, that's a good point.
Yeah,
yes.
It's a very anti-social distancing holiday. There's a very big tradition of Jews inviting non-Jews over to.
Scott, I'm going to cite you when I write this column up. That's an excellent. No, that's an excellent point. It's absolutely correct, but I'd forgotten about it. That's true.
Yeah. So now, like the joke, of course. I mean, if you follow Jewish Twitter, people, say, only Elijah's coming over this year, the prophet Elijah. But
we hope he's not infected because God, the R naught on Elijah, if he actually is infected, would be massive.
I will just say one thing though, which is very poignant, which is that a big part of the Seder is you say next year in Jerusalem.
Right.
Well, and so regardless of your politics, there's that sense of next year, hopefully next year we'll be liberated. And whatever you're thinking, my God, we're hoping next year we'll be liberated from this bondage of being not only stuck in our house, but also watching the world seem to fall apart. And it's just,
that's, I think, a really poignant point. I love that. I actually think that's, Easter's coming up, which is like not a coincidence, obviously, with Passover, which was what I was raised with, but it's not, I was never particularly religious. I was not raised particularly religious, like Presbyterian, but not like a very small liberal Presbyterian church. Yeah, I think that there's like a lot of hope for rebirth that's going to happen with spring. And with, like, I mean, across religions and time and history, and just kind of like, yeah, I think that exactly what you said. I do want to point out before we kind of move on, or we don't need to move on. Should just Ben, you should just talk about it, which is that Ben wrote this amazing column that is very funny for a Jewish newspaper called Forward, that is basically about the plagues, in which he was asked to, I don't remember when you were asked to do this, Ben, but like, if it was before or after the coronavirus, but you were asked to like put a happy spin on
No. That was my innovation. So
okay, good.
Batya Ungar Sargon, the opinion editor at the Forward, asked me to, among a bunch of other people, to write some sort of reflections on plagues. And the reason was that was, I mean, it's not just Passover relevant, but it's contemporarily relevant. And when she asked me, I was just sitting outside luxuriating in my backyard, drinking some scotch. And I was like, hey, this plague ain't so bad. And so I was, kind of guiltily wrote a piece about the kind of bright side of plagues and tried to look for the upside of each of the 10 plagues. Couldn't find one, as I said yesterday, couldn't find the bright side of lice.
Oh, but my mother-in-law came up with one for you.
Yeah, so tell us about your mother-in-law's bright side of lice.
My mother-in-law, who's like basically just figured out the internet so she can watch in lieu of fun show. Like, hi Faye, is basically like, was like, oh, I've got a really good upside for like the fun side of lice. She was like, she is a elementary school nurse. And so she was like, the upside of lice is that if you show up with it and you're a kid, you just get sent home from school, and it's like non-life threatening, and there's nothing bad about it. You just get to go home, and that you get out of school.
At least in the Jewish tradition, the biblical plague of lice was kind of like total body, itching everywhere constantly. So it kind of like eclipses that. But I totally take that in the spirit of the piece that, I'm still working on the bright side of locust. I mean, if you eat them, they do have a lot of protein, but I don't really want to I don't want to really urge people to like eat locusts. So I'm like still thinking about some of the other plagues that I can't think of the bright side of.
I'm almost scared to ask this question, but did you come up with a bright side of the death of the firstborn?
I did, yes. And I'm actually really proud of it because it came.
And tell this story.
So I was like really stuck on this one. I figured the whole column would not work if I could not come up with the bright side of killing of the firstborn.
I mean, that is the kicker, yes.
Right, it's the last plague. I mean, it's a total freaking letdown if you don't have one.
You can't hand wave away the kicker. I mean, that's the way it works, So
I looked up ancient Egyptian inheritance law, thinking, oh, maybe it's a society based on primogeniture. Most ancient societies were. And if you happen to be the second-born son, there's a heck of a bright side to the killing of the firstborn son. You get to inherit. So here's the problem. In the middle of, I forget which period of ancient Egyptian history, the inheritance law shifted from primogeniture to a system in which the firstborn son inherited 2 portions for every one the other sons got. So it's still a nice upside if you're a second-born son. You get the firstborn son's share, which is, in a Jacob and Esau like way. This is the kind of thing people fought over back then. So that was not the one that tripped me up. I came up with a bright side of boils too.
Which is what?
But antibiotics.
Oh, okay, fair enough.
and the Nile turns to blood. We have a major blood shortage right now.
Okay,
By the way,
we've talked about this.
if you're
This
listening
really-
to this,
this is only if it is one type of blood and it's the blood is the universal donor O negative. Because if you mix up all the blood, it's just gross. Okay.
To everyone
Not to
listening
mention,
to
if
this,
the blood is full of pestilence, it strikes me that is how you spread the pestilence.
right. So I left out pestilence because that's the plague we're experiencing. So
Yeah.
I just left that one out altogether. But listen, if you're listening to this, go make an appointment to give blood. We have a serious blood shortage right now. And the Potomac River or the Hudson River or the Mississippi ain't turning to O negative blood.
Charles.
So like the Charles River, I mean, the Charles, you never know, but these other rivers, like, it's not happening. And so go out and give blood. Seriously, like people need it. And, there's lots of people having all kinds of problems that aren't coronavirus and and no one's giving blood right now because, social distancing and all. Your local Red Cross chapter is accepting blood. Please go give blood.
That is a great PSA, but I'm going to now take the conversation for the last 10 to 15 minutes into kind of just some witty banter about what everyone's been doing and what their day-to-day life has been like and what's funny or not funny about like kind of what you've been going through. Just kind of riff if you want. I'm kind of curious. Scott, you're in New York, right?
All right. Yeah.
Are you kind of like I mean, I saw, maybe I should share this in the thing. I saw this it's relevant to our discussion about the Jews that we just had.
What about the Jews?
The Jews, exactly. I was like, yeah, I'm allowed to say that because I'm part Jewish. Somewhere.
It's okay. It's accepted by all Jews present in the spirit with which it was meant.
Yeah.
Thank you. But I thought this was actually a pretty funny. It was like explaining to my friend, if you remember the really terrible Mel Gibson movie about what is it? Was like about Christ. Do you remember?
Is that The Last Temptation of Christ?
No, the Passion of the Christ.
The Last Passion of the Christ. No, The Last Temptation is Martin Scorsese.
It's a Scorsese movie.
Yeah.
But The Passion of the Christ does have one really important distinguishing feature, which is that it is, to my knowledge, the only major motion picture movie ever released in the United States, principally in Aramaic.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And it
cool.
was like, finding people who are capable of acting in Aramaic is not the easiest thing in the world.
Okay, so this is the tweet.
I used to read Aramaic. Just want to say that.
Really?
Yeah, because it's in the
You
Talmud.
got to study Talmud.
Yeah.
Wow,
yeah,
that's amazing. Yeah. Okay, so this is the tweet. I'm just going to share it really quickly, which is the only thing that I think you can take away good from this movie. I thought it was a quite clever. Screen grab. But anyways, that was. I was just kind of thinking of funny things that had kind of are coming out of this. My friends who have kids, I literally this, Ben, is the reason that mystery guest is so hard for me, is that I don't remember that I have to invite a mystery guest onto the show until 2 hours before we're about to do the show. And then I just have to mentally go through my mind and check off people that have young children that I would ask to be on the show or would be interesting. And I'm Scott, I've had Scott on my list, he was at the top of the list, so it's easy. But I was does Scott have young children? Will he be able to do this last minute? And there is this kind of, I feel like this is the distinguishing thing.
Yeah. I'll just, my kids, thank goodness, are older. They're here. They're 17, 20. So they're autonomous agents, which is really good. So can I say can I just talk for 2-3 minutes about what it's like to be in New York?
Totally, please.
Okay, so I'm downtown, so around Washington Square Park area, and one of the things I think, because it's New York's the epicenter, they say, but one of the things that I think people don't realize about New York in the time of plague, but at least in Manhattan and downtown, it's kind of empty because my neighbors and people around have decided to leave and infect everyone else in the tri-state area. And so there are not that many people on the street. And I was actually—
Have they all decamped to their vacation house? I mean, what are we talking about here?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay,
yeah,
I'm
like,
that person.
Yeah, Connecticut to Long Island, various things.
Wait, Kate, where are you?
I'm in Cape Cod. I mean,
oh.
my family is not from New York City. My parents are state government officials, as I've mentioned many times on this show. They're state judges, and they bought land and built a house and then rented it for like 15, 20 years in order to pay for it. And so it's not like it's not like the same thing as the Manhattan kind of like buying a house, like whatever in the Hamptons, like type of thing. But nonetheless, I have a house that my parents built in the mid 1980s in Cape Cod that was empty, that my partner and I were in a 200 square foot studio apartment in Brooklyn. Yeah. I mean, we've lived there with a free range turtle and a blind dog for 10 years. And this was the one point where we were like, we need to leave. This is
I will just tell you
it's
that
the blindness that breaks that sentence perfect. I'm sorry.
The blind dog can't see how small the apartment is. It just goes around in circles.
A happy dog.
Yeah. That is not the case for many people around here. I mean, they have very spacious apartments. I do not have a spacious apartment, but thank God. I mean, I'm not complaining, but I will just tell one thing, which happened, which was very it actually was so touching and sad. I was walking to get sushi because the people that don't deliver, and I was walking up to 28th Street, and I was walking up 9th Avenue. And at 7 o'clock, everyone claps. And further uptown, there are a lot more people than there are downtown, and there are lots of high rises, and everyone came out onto the balcony, and they weren't just clapping, cheering, but they took out pots and they were banging on it. And it was very touching. But then an ambulance came down the street and drove slowly and started waving from the window to all the people cheering. And I have to say, I got really, I was really touching, really emotional. It was really, I was also in New York during 9/11, and it had that same kind of
bonding together of humanity.
Yeah. For first responders and for people who were literally putting their lives on the line for us. And actually, I feel kind of choked up right now. It was really a beautiful moment. But then, when it starts to get dark,
I hope we're starting with a profanity soon. Let's keep going.
No. When it starts to get dark, it's really scary in New York because there are many vulnerable populations in New York. There are people who are homeless. There are the jails. I mean, thank goodness they're relieving a lot of the isolation and the petri dishes that jails have become in New York, but a lot of these people have nowhere to go, and they're walking around the street. And normally when there are other people, they're diluted, but then you see them and there are no police really. And it's like an escape from New York. I mean, and we don't go out after dark anymore because it's just too scary. And so New York it's a sad, scary place at night, but at least at 7 p.m. there was a moment of grace.
Wow, how's stuff in Boston, Dan?
Yeah.
Well, I guess the answer, so to be fair, I don't live in Boston proper. I live in an inner ring suburb of Boston. And I have to confess that here, at least, it's been a little more uplifting. There hasn't been the downside of things getting scary after dark. The thing I've been impressed by is the degree to which two things. I actually went shopping today, which might be the last time I do that, given that we're supposed to hit our peak, at least in Massachusetts, I believe on April 7th or something, or between April 10th and April 20th. So, that might be the worst time to go out. But what I was impressed by was the degree to which everyone here pretty much gets it, for lack of a better way of putting it. To go into the supermarket, we had to wait in line, because they wanted to limit it to only 30 people in the store at the same time. I'm also impressed that everyone in the Boston area apparently has a reserve of surgical masks, or masks, like not homemade bandanas, but actual masks.
Yeah, but Dan, can I ask if that's
yeah.
I always think of like Boston as like the quintessential med ed
yes
economy.
No, that's exactly what it. So the story I always tell about this is, back in the fall, I was on a flight back from San Francisco to Boston with my son. We'd gone to a family bat mitzvah, and we were coming back. We were sitting about middle of the plane, and then suddenly someone is walking, like literally right next to me, and suddenly all the color drains from their face, and he passes out. So this obviously causes a fair commotion, and the flight attendant immediately comes, and there's a question. Someone immediately, within like 30 seconds, goes on the PA and says, if anyone is a medical professional, like a doctor, could you please raise your hand? We have a problem. And literally in the 5 aisles.
I'm a doctor, doctor of law, of which there are 5.
I did not raise my hand. I think I actually said medical doctor, to be fair. But in the 5 rows in front of me and in the 5 rows behind me, at least 15 people raised their hands. And I was like, oh right, I'm flying back to Boston. Yeah, this is so. There are a lot. Yes, I think the point being, there are a lot of people here that are medical professionals, and so it doesn't stun me that people have these. These sort of reserves at home. I mean, I have, as it turns out, surgical masks, because about 7 or 8 years ago, I had to go to Beijing. And of course, you were at the time told to bring those because of the smog that you would have there. But I've been, pleasantly surprised so far, at least. And again, this is the suburbs, with the degree to which people have been looking after their neighbors, degree to which people have been looking after more vulnerable populations, older people or what have you. Now we're still in the early stages of this, and we'll see how this goes. But that said, by and large, people have adjusted. And this is actually an argument I made in, hold on, I'll promote this. What the hell? This book, Theories of International Politics and Zombies. And one of the arguments I made in the book is that the zombie genre and the zombie canon is too pessimistic about humanity. That human beings.
Oh my God! This is why I stopped reading. Like, I read all of Walking Dead.
No.
And then you're just kind of like, fuck you. This is terrible. Everything is just continuing to be awful, and there's never going to be a recovery of any meaningful kind.
Right. No, I read like the first couple of years of The Walking Dead, and then I also watched the first 6 seasons of the show. And after Negan came on the scene, I'm like, fuck you. I've had enough of this. It's just, the interesting parts in the beginning were the debate between Rick and Shane as to whether or not it was possible to be, to carve out a good society in a harsh world, or are we living in a Hobbesian war of all against all? And it turns out Shane won, even if he died, and that is the only message the show has. And so it ceased to be important. But in actual society, it turns out that human beings are a little more adaptable and a little more cooperative. We're awesome. We invented duct tape, for Christ's sake. So, I'm actually relatively confident that, as bad as this is...
Yeah, but we can't spell it with any consistency.
Fair enough. But my point being, while there are bad people out there, and while there are circumstances under which people are often forced to act in a purely self-interested way, we are not even remotely there yet. And I am I'm cheered by the fact that, frankly, most Americans, and frankly most people across the world, have recognized, oh, okay, we need to do social distancing, not because I myself might die, but because I want to protect other people from dying. By acting, according to these rules, and not necessarily just saving myself, I'm trying to save the most vulnerable parts of the population. And that is legitimately contributing to the public good. And as the small L liberal that I am, I do find that heartwarming.
All right, we have a question from John Bordeaux, who says he actually prefers not to be on camera. But he says the task force is telegraphing pretty clearly now that the next week or so will be horrific. My sense is that this means that most Americans will know a victim all at once. How do you interpret the odd change of tone as of yesterday? And I'm going to add to that. And how do you think it changes things, assuming John is right and that the average person suddenly is touched by this immediately? Scott, what's your instinct about this?
I mean, I think that, you know, if you're running the presidential campaign of the incumbent, I think it's like, from a political perspective, it's the apocalypse. You know, I just saw the president of the Fed of St. Louis branch said that they predict 10 to 42, a range between 10 and 42% unemployment, with 32% unemployment being the compromise middle. I mean, I don't know how you can run a campaign to be as the incumbent under such a condition, and certainly you can't poo-poo it away in the way that the administration had been doing up until a little while ago. So, I mean, I think this, from a political perspective, I think this is you know, the nightmare scenario.
What do you think, Dan?
So this is hard for me to talk about. First of all, I mean, I strongly suspect my brother had this. My sister-in-law also probably had this. We're not entirely sure because they live in Colorado. There was a shortage of tests when it was really acute for them. And so hopefully there will be an antibodies test where they can determine whether or not they actually had it. But the fact that they had to go to the emergency room because my sister-in-law had difficulty breathing suggests that it was pretty damn serious. And there are also other people I know that have had it. Adam Schlesinger, who is passed away this week. He was a well-known songwriter. He was one of the songwriters for Fountains of Wayne, and he wrote the eponymous song for That Thing You Do. He was a year ahead of me at Williams, and so that hit me really hard as well, even though I didn't know him terribly well. But you know, the way I would put it is that my unfortunate concern is that it's not actually going to change all that much. That what winds up happening essentially is that people who know people who have died, if they support the president, will rationalize that by saying, well, you know, these things happen, and now if at any time we need to come together, much like we did in a post 9/11 moment, and why can't the liberal media, you know, really, you know, get behind that and ask nicer questions? And the people who don't like Trump are simply going to dislike Trump even more. You know, I wrote something in the Post last week, I think, or the week before last, where, you know, my greatest fear at this point is not dying. My greatest fear at this point is going a day where there never being a day where I'm not angry at what's happened.
Fair enough. It's a very pointed and poignant comment. Kevin R has a question. Kevin, thanks for joining us. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, well, in the discussion of what foot traffic was like in the various cities, I was reflecting that what I'm seeing in Chicago has struck me as very much being sort of the day after a massive blizzard type level of, yeah, there's a lot fewer people on the street, but there still are some out there. You'll see somebody every, a couple of people every block kind of thing. I'm in River North, just north of the Loop. But what had caught my eye, or what caught my attention, was a comment on the homeless crowds. And at least around here, we're seeing about the same number of homeless, maybe even a few less. But what's caught my attention is it's none of our usual ones. It's a different set of homeless people. So,
what do you attribute that to?
I wonder if it may be that the city has set up good shelters or alternatively that the ones that at least where I am, we don't have, we're more of a touristy type area, so we don't actually have encampments here. They're a mile or so away in a couple different directions, and I haven't been over there to see what those look like. But at least in terms of the usual crowd of people, begging for whatever handout, though, and the ones who are selling the local magazine and things like that, those folks are all off the street. And so I don't know whether that means that they have shelters that they're normally in, or whether the city's done a better job of opening up shelters and trying to keep people in a good place.
You saw the Nevada, I think Las Vegas. There was a Las Vegas, Nevada, like picture that was going around of a parking lot that had been cordoned into 6-foot areas in which homeless people were supposed to cordon themselves. This was all while hotels were actively like completely vacant because of the lack of tourism that had occurred. And people were like, yes, let's like let people sleep in these like kind of on these like in these 6-foot partitions in a parking lot. We're going to spray paint these versus letting them live in a hotel or something. I don't know. Like I teach property law and like land use. And I'm also just like generally like a not terrible person. And I would like people to be able to, if they want to have like a home over their heads and like whatever else. But I would say that like a lot of people who work on homelessness issues specifically mention that it's not always or often about a lack of resources. It's often about mental health issues. And lack of kind of like healthcare around those things. And that is actually the least thing that I think that we can give people right now, given where we're healthcare providers, what our healthcare providers are doing. And so like, I just like, I have such mixed, not mixed. I just have such like tragic feelings about like the homelessness situation that's happening at the, like right now. I don't know. Do you guys have anything else to pitch in?
I would say one thing, which is what is so awful, is that when the homeless people come up to you and asking you for things, like you back off, like because you're social distancing,
Right?
And it's just you feel awful. You feel like a terrible person.
If it makes you feel better, Scott, there's a pretty like well-studied like social psychology mechanism for this, which I think that all people should employ all the time, which is like people generally report if they're like everything from doing like political activism on the street to like being homeless is like people ignore them, and that being the worst part. And so acknowledging them and saying hello and saying I'm sorry but I cannot is actually a huge, like that's all they need. They just like, I'm sorry, sir, I have no cash, or I'm sorry, sir, I can't give to you today, or like, I'm sorry, ma'am. And like doing that makes a huge difference and is like far less dismissive and like recognizes their personhood and like their, and everything they're going through.
That's an excellent piece of advice. Thank you.
Yeah. But I mean, go ahead, Ben. Sorry.
We have Vishnu Kanan from Michigan. Vishnu, what's on your mind?
Hey, I'm back. So this is a question it's a bit of a pivot, but it's a question for all of you, since you all write in some capacity or another for a living. How dramatically have you had to diverge from your routine to stay productive as you're kind of trapped inside? And if you have had to diverge, what's the new routine?
Can I answer that first?
Yeah, let's just go down the line. Dan.
Yeah, my answer is I'm not productive. And so the notion that somehow, by not having to commute anywhere and by essentially I'm relatively privileged. I'm saying this from my home office. So I have a space where I can continue to teach, via Zoom, and I can continue to do my work, which is what I used to do, when before, half the time I would be doing work from home. This particular crisis, however, has completely consumed my brain to the point where I am able to do the bare minimum of what I am supposed to do. I can teach still. I can teach the courses that I am supposed to. I can write the columns that I'm supposed to for the Post. Beyond that, I have not done much. It has been extremely hard to focus. I'm not sleeping terribly well. I find myself distracted and absent-minded in a way that I cannot recall since the time that I had toddlers. And newborns, when I was not sleeping, nearly that well, and trying to react to it. So I do give kudos to those of you out there who are able to be productive in this particular time. I am not one of those people.
Scott, what about you? Are you being productive?
No. Just look at my Twitter feed. I have to say that I can't hear things like what Dan said enough, because I feel like I am wasting an opportunity. So what opportunity one can have for writing and being productive during the apocalypse is really not clear. But I am really, if I get in 2 hours of writing a day, I mean, that I'm like, but I'm not even really good 2 hours. I mean, really distracted 2 hours. I feel really lucky. I just feel like, on the one hand, I'm blowing this golden opportunity just to write, though I'm also teaching classes and
but
stuff
it's not
like
a golden opportunity. It's a freaking disaster. And that I think
know.
any way to describe this as a golden opportunity, I think even to dismiss it is not just wrong, it's actually extremely counterproductive, because it presents the idea that somehow we should be seizing the opportunity of the fact that we're housebound to continue to do work, without recognizing what is fundamentally a national trauma that we will be telling our grandchildren about.
No, I that's of course right. And again, please keep on saying that, because, but like, we're, if you're, there's a great expression that Stephen King had, which is, when he said, amateurs wait for inspiration, professionals write.
Yeah, that's fair.
And so, like, it's kind of ingrained in us. We write. That's what we do, and it doesn't matter if you're messed up. You just write. And but you're right. There's a way in which it's somehow morally bizarre to be able to be focused.
The way I would put it is that as someone who writes for a public audience, but also someone who tries to write for a scholarly audience, one of the problems that I think my academic colleagues occasionally suffer from, and I talk about this in the ideas industry, is they equate all words equally, or they treat all words equally. The belief that if you are writing an article for the American Political Science Review or the American Journal of International Law or what have you, that's the same thing as if you're writing for Foreign Affairs, or if you're writing for the Washington Post, or if you're writing a tweet. And that's just bullshit. There's no other way to put that. These are very different kinds and different styles of writing. The kind of writing that I have to do where I'm trying to get something through peer review is, agonizing is not quite the word, but it takes the ratio of effort to words on the page is much greater. Now, I've been fortunate that I've written long enough for a public audience, and I've written for the Post now for 6 years, so that I can do that with less, the effort to word ratio is much lower. And so that's fair. And it goes to your point about professionals, right? But there are different kinds of writing. And I think, for the kind of writing where you're trying to, do original research or make an original, argument at length with theory and evidence and considering the counterfactuals and so on and so forth, that is a kind of writing that some probably can do now. And I am not one of those people.
So Dan, sorry, Scott, did you
No,
want to
I wanted to ask you, Kate, about because you've just emerged from this writing hell.
So Scott knows about this because a week ago, 2 weeks ago, like I was frantic. Scott and I had a number of like frantic phone calls in which I would over a text message ask him these insanely broad philosophical questions. And I'm like, can you give me a citation to like the rule of law? Like, or something like
Isn't that the classic Oren Kerr? I mean, going back to Oren Kerr, isn't this the classic Oren Kerr citation?
Yeah, I mean,
totally,
like that's what Scott gave me.
Yeah,
So-
a theory of law. That's it. It's a theory of law. That's what the name of it is. Yes.
But I just want to say that, like, so like we had these conversations, but like, and Ben knows the story because I've talked about this, and it is literally so like. It's very funny because it's not funny, but like it is like this interesting thing that has happened. So about 24 days ago, 25 or 6 days ago, I think it was like that first week in March when everyone was taking this seriously in New York for the first time. My partner and I were looking at each other and we were like, we got to get the hell out of here. And like, we were trying to figure out when to do it. And finally we decided, like, when one of the people in his office had been like diagnosed, that we were going to get out and we were going to go to like, that this was going to be serious and we were going to go to Cape Cod. And so we left and we sequestered. I want to also say that we like literally have not done anything except grocery shop like since we've been here. Like even if we're carriers in some way, even though we've had no exposure, like we just have tried to be really responsible about it. But like, anyways, we got here for 2 days. Our dog got really sick and we had to go to the emergency vet. And like, then again, and then again. And it was like 6 days of complete panic. And then as I'm coming out of that panic, there was a message from the Yale Law Journal that basically was like, hey, your paper that you haven't finished writing, and which we have 25,000 words of, but we need the final part of, which is basically like 50,000 words. Like we need like that. We need that like on deadline. Oh, and the deadline is 2 days from now. We're still holding you to this deadline. And so I literally, like I think my dog is dying. Like there's a pandemic, there's everything. I sit down in the spot. You can't see it because MASH is behind me, but like in the spot, in this hard.
It was very disturbing earlier watching you like dive into Mike Farrell's chest to get a drink or something.
Yes. And I just kind of sit down and I'm like, I run 20-hour days. Like literally I sleep for 4 hours at a time for 5 days. And I try to finish up writing the remainder of the piece is like 60,000 words. It gets shipped off at Tuesday, 3 days after deadline. I communicated the whole thing. Like in between, I was like, okay, we're not going to quite make deadline, but here you go. And like, it was such a tremendous moment of productivity. But when I emerged and like finally got over, and also, by the way, was still teaching in all of these moments. So I was like carving out time to like teach myself co-tenancy and landlord tenant law, like reteach it to myself and then teach it to other people and help all of my students through like getting evicted and all
their
of
own
these
adjustments, right?
Students dying, like parents dying, all of this stuff. I was like, I put this thing out and I was like, great. And like 2 days later, I kind of slept a lot. And then I was like, okay. And I was like, oh, it's been 2 weeks since we left New York. What's going on with the pandemic? It was literally like, that was what the trade-off was. Like it forced me to not deal with this at all. Like I didn't look at anything. Like,
was it a relief?
I'm a little jealous, frankly, but yes.
Yeah, it was like, and I like kind of came out and I was like, oh God. And now I can't sleep through the night. And not because I'm writing a freaking paper, but because this is crazy. And I literally fall asleep thinking about the end of social order and the social contract and like that this is just never going to recover from that.
What about Ben? Ben, are you, I mean, you have to be productive. I mean, you have to get the trains to run. How have you been dealing with this?
So the irony is I just finished teaching a class at HLS this fall, which I was teaching for the first time, in which the premise of it was very similar to it was like a class about how to do legal writing for non-specialist audiences, and specifically how to do it well, predictably, and without being caught up in writer's block, and how to be it's very similar to the Stephen King ethos that one of you described, that like, this is your job. Just treat it like you're a general contractor, and this isn't a great work of art that you're producing. It's just what you churn out every day. So I'm experiencing, I have not gone through what Kate has gone through, which is to force myself into a, intense period of productivity, which is actually pretty extraordinary to do that in this period of time.
I mean, it's driven by fear, right?
Of course, and it's also driven by necessity.
I'm a junior academic, and I'm terrified that Yale Law Journal is going to pull their acceptance of this this perspective piece from me because I don't meet my deadline. So there is it's mindset. Driven by a huge amount of fear. I'm not like Dan and Scott where I have tenure. So
right, but look, I think if Dan and Scott had a deadline on a big piece, they would force themselves to do it and to make it. I accept that that's an accentuating factor, but I think the biggest factor is, Yale Law Journal called you and said, no, we're not negotiating about the deadline, get it done. So you forced yourself to get it done. Everything I've had to get done, I've gotten done. I haven't had an imaginative thought. I haven't had a big idea. I haven't had a medium-sized idea. I've been extremely effective at running lawfare. And at the things that I need to do, including writing some stuff. I'm a professional writer. If I have to write something, I write something. But I would urge everybody out there who's feeling like this is a great opportunity to be, to have a period of productivity. Very few people are productive in the throes of a cataclysm. Normally the productivity comes after it, when this is the time you're experiencing something, and there are great works that are produced midstream that are kind of the most extreme example of it is the prison diaries of a whole bunch of people, but everybody from
I was gonna say One Day in the Life of Ivan Denisovich. Yeah.
Sure, right. I mean, you can come up with examples of it, but most of the time there are periods where we experience things, and there are periods where we process them productively, and they're not the same periods. And particularly something that's as shocking and as disruptive to the way we live as this, it's completely unreasonable to expect yourself and to beat yourself up and feel guilty about not having this not being the period where you, like Isaac Newton, come up with calculus.
I hate that guy.
That guy, man, I mean, seriously. He also, by the way, and also Newton got the goddamn gold standard wrong. The reason.
Can we? Oh my gosh, Dan,
yeah.
Can we have Dan, can we have an entire show that is about how people are famous while also being wrong? And so this is what is it like? What is Lewick's kind of evolutionary theory where he cut the tails off of mice and thought
Lamarck.
Lamarckian
genetics, yeah.
Yes, Markian genetics. The idea of what would it be like to be that dude who is famous for literally thousands of years and hundreds of years for getting it fucking wrong.
Yeah.
Versus
on that cheerful note, because remember, you could be using this period, Scott Shapiro, to be producing a magnum opus that is spectacularly wrong and that would have you infamous for the next several hundred years, so that the name Shapiro, like the name Lamarck, would be synonymous with being spectacularly wrong about something. So look at the bright side, that non-productivity is way better than productivity in the depths of wrongness.
Yeah, Kepler was like a heliocentric model. Let's just remind ourselves.
You had me until the that means that I'm not going to be famous for a couple hundred years.
No, I didn't. I just said the best model here is you're not productive right now. It's okay. You'll process this, and then in 2 years' time, you'll write something actually important and right about the experience now.
I've said this before.
Very wise.
I've said this before, which is this is even before the coronavirus. I'm looking forward to, ideally, I want just enough fame so that 20 years from now, I'm on a History Channel documentary in which people interview me and I say, yeah, he thought he could buy Greenland. That actually happened.
That's the perfect note.
That's my goal.
That's the perfect note on which to close. By then, the History Channel will be done on Zoom conference, and we'll all be living in those matrix pods, and we won't even have a real existence.
Or the Love is Blind pods. That sounds much nicer.
We're laughing, but I actually don't think that that's like so far from the truth. Like that's like, can't you imagine like live reenactment? Like of Zoom, like catching the live reenactment.
They will feed you Soylent to keep you going in your pod. But I think we need to wrap up.
We've had a lot of fun in lieu of fun.
Yeah, this is really completely misnamed show, because I really haven't laughed and smiled for a couple of weeks, and so I really want to thank you guys.
Oh,
well, thank you for doing it, and thank you, Dan.
In the immortal words of Keanu Reeves, whoa.
On that note, we'll be back. We will be back tomorrow at 5 o'clock. Kate, who do we have tomorrow? Oh no, tomorrow we're at 6 o'clock, right?
Oh yeah, tomorrow we're at 6 o'clock because I have to teach a class at Yale Law School with Jack Balkin. But then we're going to be having Nate Persley and Alex Damos on to talk about democracy and elections. Which will be a really great selection of people to talk about like what's going on with.
It'll be less funny than today,
disinformation.
In the small world universe, Nate is very good friends with was very good friends with my wife when they were like little. So.
Oh really?
Yes.
He's like one of my favorite people.
There you go. Really, we'll say hi to him for me and say hi to Jack as well.
Yeah.
Will do. So 6 o'clock tomorrow, we will post the link on Twitter. And remember, if you can't have fun in lieu of fun, there's us. Kate, see you tomorrow.
Okay. Bye, everyone. Bye-bye. Thank you.